It's another soap making day in September, and today I thought I'd take you with me to collect fresh groundwater from a running spring way up in the Litchfield Hills in Connecticut. Now you probably know that it's standard practice to use distilled bottled water when making your soap, and occasionally you might come across a few warnings about not using tap water or bottled mineral water. But how does this really affect your finished product? And are there any advantages to using fresh natural spring water? And when you hear about the disadvantages, how realistic is that really? Well, here in Connecticut, we have natural springs where the public will bring empty bottles and then cart it home and use it as they please. So if you happen to live in a place where your water's been cut off, or you just don't have access to good quality clean water, you can actually always have access to free, clean, drinkable water if you can manage the transportation for it. Now, some of these springs have been here from the beginning of the Connecticut colony, and people have been using them since we've gotten here. Now, this isn't exactly a public utility. You don't see people lined up to fill up their bottles of water, although on some locations in Connecticut you do see it more frequently, especially if they're in a more populated area. And the state, to my understanding, doesn't necessarily regulate these springs, but sometimes they will send people out from the DEP just to test them to make sure that they're drinkable and that there isn't any kind of bacterial overgrowth, so that no one is getting any kind of surprises from a water resource that they've been using for a very long time. Now, this location is about 25 minutes from my house, and it's in a quiet residential neighborhood. Now, I picked this one because it's right on the side of the road, and it isn't always clear if some of these springs are public or private property. So I know that we won't be accidentally trespassing to find our location. The northwest corner of Connecticut is actually a little piece of the Appalachian Mountains, and there really isn't much of anything up here for travelers other than hiking and camping. We're pretty far away from the Boston to New York corridor, so the only people up here live here, and there's a pretty good chance that their families have lived here for a really long time. The location was easy to spot immediately, and the homeowners who live at the top of the spring even have it decorated and marked in an inviting way. And I know what you're probably thinking. Wait, that's it? Where's the fountain? Where's the waterfall? Where's the lady trying to give you a sword? Well, we have those places not too far from here, but I'll have to show you that in another video. This is basically what all of the freshwater springs look like. It's a spigot tapped into the ground, and it's usually free pouring water into a drain grate. The first thing I noticed is that the water is crystal clear and it's freezing cold. And I immediately wanted to see if I could recognize the flavor of minerals or metals in it, because if there are any adverse reactions in our soap recipe, it'll be probably because of metal content. This water was so delicious, and although it doesn't really taste like anything, there's something in it that is something that I'm not able to really describe, something that's more alive, something that's more sort of vibrant about this water. It just feels good when you drink it, and this isn't anything that I could compare to with bottled water or spring water from the grocery store. And the bottled water and spring water from the grocery store is probably very much like the same thing. It's just that it's been sitting on the shelf for a while and perhaps it's settled. So I'm guessing whatever it is that my brain or my body is registering in this, it has to do with the mineral content in the water. But whatever it is, I really, really enjoyed it. I really liked it, and it tasted absolutely delicious. As a matter of fact, after I brought that 3 gallons home, I've been drinking it all day long. Now, just because it tastes good doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a good product to make for soap. So before we finish up here, let's pour some lye water and see how this fresh spring water reacts when we make our first batch of lye water for a project that I'm about to make this evening. Now, I first poured the water and just kind of observed it to see if there's anything in there that I can see that would be significantly different from distilled water from the grocery store. And I can tell you that I do see some kind of a sediment, and it's so faint that I can't quite tell if it's my imagination or if it's really just little air bubbles. So we'll try to see if that sediment is significant when we pour the lye crystals in. Now the first thing that happens when we pour the lye crystals in is I notice that there's a film that builds up right along the top, and I see this sometimes with some bottles of water. And this film kind of lasted a little while. It didn't go away immediately. As a matter of fact, you'll see this in just a second. You'll start to see a frothy layer develop right along the top of the surface of the water. And although that could be because of inclusions to the water, but also it could be because the bottle that I had filled the water with was previously an oil container. That was a Rice Bran bottle that I had purchased, and although I washed it out well enough, that actually could be a little bit of oil that's reacting with the lye water on the top. Even so, what I'm looking for is a violent reaction that you would see if we had introduced aluminum to the sodium hydroxide, and that doesn't seem to be happening. But we're going to take our time and we're going to watch this for a few minutes, because sometimes when you have an aluminum reaction, such as someone who's trying to make a batch of soap and they're using the wrong dishes to mix things in, sometimes that aluminum reaction does not happen immediately. Sometimes it takes a few minutes. So someone could actually be working on pulling their soap into a trace, and then all of a sudden everything starts to turn green and fume and smell really bad. So we take our time and we watch this to see if there's anything happening. And what we end up finding is that the water is cloudy for a little while, and we're going to step away, and essentially we've got a lye water solution that really appears to be very similar to every other batch of soap that I make. Now if you do see something floating around in there, I actually got a little calendula flower petal stuck in there, so you might see a little brown speck, and that's just a flower petal that came in off my glove. So that wasn't anything that was included in this particular lye mixture as far as the content of the water. But so far, so good. And we're going to come back in just a moment and talk more about this. Now after 30 minutes, the lye water settled just fine, and there didn't appear to be anything out of the ordinary. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make a product that's as stable in your soap as the predictability of the distilled bottled water. And one of the reasons that is because sometimes when you don't use distilled water, then you end up getting the dreaded orange spots from different types of water that might have different inclusions or might have different chemicals or qualities in it. And this happens sometimes when people buy spring water right off the shelf, and sometimes it happens when they use their tap water. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. It's just one of those things that we're going to watch for to see if the quality of this water produces a bar that's the same quality of the stable water that we know works really well. Now I just want to mention that in the earlier clip you saw me drinking directly from that spring, and I just need to mention that that water is a very well-known drinkable resource. There are tons of people that go up there all the time and fill up their water supply and drink directly from that spring. So don't think that if you happen to live near a natural water resource that you can necessarily just go out and drink any water that you find out in nature, because that might not be the case where you are, and I didn't walk into that spring not knowing that. Now I'm going to set this aside and watch it for a little while I prepare to make a slab mold of black cherry swirl. So I'd encourage you to tune into the next video while we go through the tutorial on making the black cherry swirl soap, and we're going to use this natural spring water lye water solution as our base for the next soap recipe. So tune into the next recipe, and here we have our lye water solution with fresh spring water that we fetched ourselves up from the Litchfield Hills and came straight out of the mountains. Now, I have personally read a ton of warnings about not deviating from your distilled bottled water, but this looks like a workable solution, and it might create a product that your customers enjoy, and there might be some sort of novelty about going up and fetching a natural local spring water from an area where people live and they feel connected to. So tune into the next video and we'll check out the results of our black cherry swirl.